What is up with the pronunciation on obgyn? Why do you spell it out letter for letter? Is it supposed to be a secret? It is an abbreviation, but not in the way that each letter represents an entirely different word. I don't get it. Why not just call it a gynecologist? Edit to clarify, I know what the syllables stand for and I also know how each letter is pronounced. In English, as a non-native speaker, I've just always found it counterintuitive to spell each letter out, considering it's not an actual acronym where each letter stands for something different. I was also not aware that OB and GYN are two distinctly different medical specialties. So thanks for elaborating on that. This is my Today I Learned moment of the day. Why not just call it a gynecologist? Because an obstetrician isn't necessarily a gynecologist and vice versa. They're very commonly the same person. Which is why OBGYN is a frequent abbreviation. But to just call them a gynecologist would be saying that they don't have a specialization that they studied and trained for. Because saying obgyn or OBGYN sounds dumb. Plus it's obstetrician and gynecologist, not just the latter. I've always said it as an acronym. OBGYN, but now that seems wrong. IDK. People do say gynecologist or shorten it to gyno when they are talking about their women's health care. I'm going to see my gyno on Tuesday for a PAP. They also might say they are going to the obstetrician for a pregnancy-related appointment, even if both of those appointments are with the same OBGYN. But if I was talking about someone I knew and what they do for a living, I would say they are an OBGYN because they have both specialties. We say it that way because there's no better way to pronounce it. Not sure why it isn't just OG, but that also feels wrong. Lol. Obstetrician, gynecologist, OBGYN or OBGYN is easier than saying the full words for both. Lol. Do people spell it out? I always read it as obgyn. We don't really use it in the UK, so I'm not very familiar with the term, and most of my exposure to it is in written form online. I grew up hearing them referred to as OB-GYNs, OB-GYNs, as in obstetrician gynecologists, which I always thought should be the preferred pronunciation over spelling it like it's an acronym. I'll let the OB slide though, since it sounds silly to just say oblol. Relatedly, you'll hear the medical specialty end pronounced letter by letter because it is an acronym for ear, nose and throat. The official name of the specialty is otorhinolaryngology, but you can see why people don't use that. Technically, it's not an acronym, it's an initialism. An acronym is when the initials are pronounced as a word, like NASA, NATO, etc. An initialism is when they are pronounced individually, like FBI, KGB, SEC, and so on. This doesn't really answer your question other than it's pronounced that way because it is an initialism, not an acronym. We say brats and twats in the UK. Hope that helps. Isn't it OB-GYN? Like rhymes with, I don't know, knob pine? OBGYNX200B, just say the letters. Agree. If you're going to go to the effort of creating a portmanteau, you might as well pronounce it phonetically. That's sort of the whole point. We don't use that word in the UK, but if we did, I'd expect people to pronounce it obgyn. What's funny is I used to work at one and they all referred to it as like OB-GYN pronunciation. And it confused everyone. Doctors pronounce it OB-GYN. I don't know, I can't think of another that, it's very strange. It doesn't make sense, but that's just how it's said in the US. I just say gyno. Edit, and yes, that isn't how it's spelt. Because obstetrician gynecologist is 12 syllables and who has time for that? OBs are OBs. But nobody calls a gynecologist a GYN. So since you're starting saying OB, you just continue with GYN. That's my take on it anyhow. I just say OB or GYN gyne, like 9. Another strange American English phenomenon. I don't know why it then becomes MRSA for MRSA. These oddities are everywhere. An obstetrician is more than a GYN. And this is why we ask questions. I sound out the letter individually if required. As an Australian, I just say gyno, or we just go to the doctor for a scent and scrape. Because we're classy like that. It isn't an acronym. It is an initialism. For an acronym, you pronounce it as a word. Like scuba or laser. For an initialism, you pronounce each letter. As in FBI or OBGYN. I say OBGYN. It doesn't make sense to say every letter. It means obstetrics and gynecology. OBGYN flows off the tongue better than obgyn or obgyn. Most people, especially women, recognize the GYN as gynecology, or at least related to medical, when it's spelt out. It's an initialism, not an acronym, I believe. It's like saying FBI instead of FUBEE. I always assumed it's because it sounds stupid if you try and pronounce it. It's just easier to say than obstetrician gynecologist. It is pronounced OBGYN. Some people shorten it to OB even if they are not pregnant. And that is okay. We know what they mean. You pronounce it as obgyn. 2 syllables. It stands for something. Obstetric gynecologist. Obstetric means relating to childbirth. Gynecology is the area of medicine for women's diseases with a specialty in reproductive organs. OBGYN. Similarly, in hospitals this is fairly common. RPN, registered practical nurse. One wouldn't pronounce that ripon. OBGYN stands for obstetrician gynecologist. It's just easier to say the letters than what it stands for. It's like saying GM instead of General Motors. Because the doctor is a obstetrician gynecologist, OBGYN and OBGYN are both common and acceptable. Here, I worked in hospitals and clinics and these doctors called themselves that. Because they are not just gynecologists. Obstetrician is hard to say. It's not a matter of pronunciation unless you're wondering why it's not pronounced as a word. It's spelled out because it's an abbreviation. It's abbreviated because 5 syllables are easier than 9. OBGYN is just easier to say and spell than obstetrician gynecologist. Medical staff will abbreviate and so patients will hear the abbreviation and also use it. Not all OBs are strictly gyns. And many gyns don't deliver babies. BTW. They're different qualifications but not interchangeable. My dad is a gynecologist and he looks at vaginas all day long. OBGYN. Think it's picked up from the medical community. It's not unusual to say someone is ARN, or an MA, or even ADO, etc. Obstetricians and gynecologists are 2 separate things. Gynos handle female care in general. OBs specifically handle pregnancy. Although some doctors do both. 9 syllables to say them out vs 5 single-syllable letters or 3 if you say GYN as a syllable is why abbreviations exist. Some gyns do not actually deliver babies or care for pregnancies.